In this, the 109th year of our association service, the association that has stood the test of time in her antagonism of corrupt and sinister systems of oppression, as well as in her staunch supportive advocacy for the valueless, the voiceless, and the voteless. In this, the 75th year of the State Conference of Branches of the North Carolina NAACP's existence, it makes me feel good to know that God is still giving power to the weak, strength to the powerless, and courage to those who have no might.
Amen.
I'm deeply enthused to deliver this State of Civil Rights in North Carolina address, standing as the 5th president of our association and humbly acknowledging and appreciating the service of the executive committee, both elected officers, the 4 vice presidents, Sister Carolyn Coleman, and I thank her for that introduction and presentation this morning, our 2nd vice, Carolyn McDougall, our 3rd vice, Brother Keith Rivers, and our 4th vice, Brother Courtney Patterson. I want to also recognize the president of the Youth and College Division, Stephanie Butts, Secretary Sylvia Barnes, Assistant Secretary Olinda Watkins McShirley, Treasurer and Convention Chair Daphne Holmes Johnson, Assistant Treasurer Robert Cunningham, the 16 district directors and appointed standing and special committee chairs, nearly 100 presidents, branch members, guests, and friends, and most of all, the delegates to this 75th annual state convention. On last Tuesday, I convened my last meeting as president of the North Carolina Council of Churches for the past 2 years, and wholeheartedly believe that the Lord was leading me during that time to guide the council back to its formative reason for being. In short, the story of the council is the story of persons, religious leaders, struggling to respond in faith to the signs of their times. H. Shelton Smith, the council's founder, had organized ecumenical, interracial camps around the nation, but never in the South, and was passionate about racial reconciliation. And in 1935, the North Carolina Council of Churches was born with a focus on race relations. But it would take 8 years before they would invite any black churches to sit at the table of civility. So during my presidency, I reminded the council of her reason for being and sat her back on a fast track toward racial equity. In 1909, a few courageous people, weary of being locked out of the freedom that was America's promise, dared to unveil a social experiment in the United States of America. Inasmuch as this association's preamble charges us to stand against all forms of injustice as we envision a society in which all individuals have equal rights and strive to realize a country free of racial hatred and racial discrimination, even in the midst of a deeply violent and vitriolic climate such as ours. I have sought to represent this office from a perspective which finds the North Carolina State Conference of Branches building within while battling without, acutely aware that there are many more foes for us to face. Therefore, our willingness to stand up for one another and demand more access to the excess within this nation and coalesce in our struggle to build power together, that willingness must grow greater than it has ever been before. So great, in fact, that influences from without will no longer be capable of corrupting our congruity, insinuating our integrity, or interrupting our ingenuity. Then, too, on the other hand, we must be ever so determined not to allow influences from within to invalidate our veracity or normalize our abnormality. It is time for us to raise up an army to build some capacity, collective capacity, but you cannot raise an army or build capacity when you stand by indifferently while your dearest rights are being denied or abridged. When by your disposition you persistently refuse to step away from conducting business as usual, you will not be able to build anything. With these things in mind, I deem it prudent to be precise and contextualize the type of power that we must come together and build. Simply put, we must build from reconstruction power. Come on. That is, power that springs forth from the Reconstruction Amendments. In this constitutionally reconstructed nation that was largely reshaped by two of the most important constitutional decisions ever made, which, by the way, were not made by justices of the Supreme Court, but rather by he who was called the great emancipator, the Republican President Abraham Lincoln. The two highly significant Lincoln-made decisions helped Lincoln to gift-wrap this nation with a new platform and purpose and present it with equity to the only ethnic group that constituted an involuntary presence on this nation's soil. That ultimately resulted in a reframing and reworking that actually purified this nation's constitution. Those decisions were, one, to resist unilateral secession of states from the Union, which, by the way, on May 20th, 1861, was the most calamitous decision made in the history of the state of North Carolina, and two, to free the multitude of slaves, that is, our ancestors, our great-grandparents, our families, and our kin, who had been forced to live lives filled with defamation, degradation, and deprivation, lives filled with harassment, horror, and humiliation, lives of subjection, suspicion, and suppression, lives of paucity, poverty, and pain, lives that were filled with chaos, criminalization, and cruelty. But thanks be to God that Lincoln's vision made room for the crafting of some constitutional civil rights, which gave and keep on giving every last one of us the right to stand in this land totally and unequivocally free.
Come on. Come on.
For us, those civil rights can definitively be described as the original and most powerful stimulus package that Black people in America will ever know. Something I'm glad to report that money cannot buy and white supremacy cannot deny. I'm talking about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Those are largely your amendments, whose primary purpose was to add tremendous civil and moral value to your Black lives. 53 years ago, when I was made a member of the NAACP, there was more talk around the NAACP about being a Reconstruction Association built on the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. When it is remembered that our foreparents were lifted from the most degraded condition to the very pinnacle of sovereign manhood by one stroke of the pen, you ought to get stimulated by that. With this Reconstruction knowledge, we can begin to build power. Yet, conversely, by the lack of this knowledge, we will be utterly destroyed. Therefore, we ought never leave home without the knowledge of these Reconstruction amendments. This must be a part of the basic training of every last one of our members. The 13th Amendment forever freed you. The 14th Amendment firmly fixed you. And the 15th Amendment formally franchised you. The 13th Amendment emancipated you. The 14th Amendment enumerated you. And the 15th Amendment emboldened you. I want to push that one more time. The 13th Amendment personified you. The 14th Amendment paritized you. And the 15th Amendment plenipotentialized you. The package gave you the power to be on equal footing with every other citizen of these United States. And if they don't acknowledge your stimulus package, you certainly should. Because your presence, I repeat, your presence is still shaking them up 155 years later. For the package gives us the strength to endure the heel that crushes our necks. It is through the prism of these three Reconstruction amendments that the mission of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People must always be filtered through or refracted. They are the fulcrum of this association, whose mission is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights of all persons, and to eliminate race-based discrimination. When just one of us become the embodiment of that mission statement, one can thoroughly understand why we are the oldest and the boldest,
All right.
the baddest
Yes.
and the boldest, the most loved and the most hated, the most feared and the most revered, the most cussed and the most discussed, and the most zestful and successful civil rights association in all of America. Our power flows from the stimulus package. Every action we perform must be traced back to those amendments. This helps us to fully understand why the present General Assembly in Raleigh hates to see us coming. Why? Because we know who we are, we know whose we are, and we utterly refuse to totally forget or remain ignorant of the fact that we now stand on an anti-slavery foundation in this land that they call the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Amen.
That's the stimulus those three amendments afford us. In them, we must learn to live, move, and have our absolute being, because they, like the Lord, prop us up on every leaning and falling side. With this stimulus package, Ida B. Wells moved with the fortitude to know without a doubt that lynching could be eliminated in her lifetime.
Amen.
With this stimulus package, Charles Hamilton Houston, the Moses of the Civil Rights Movement, and his student Thurgood Marshall gave the standing in the landmark 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Yes.
In 1955, this stimulus package prompted Rosa Parks to sit down with dignity so that those coming behind her would have the power to stand up with courage against the corrosive corruption in this country. This stimulus package enabled the Little Rock Nine to collectively resist opposition to desegregation in 1957 and gave backbone to the cause of the Greensboro Four in 1960. This stimulus package stimulated the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Yes.
It nullifies acrimonious ambivalence. It eradicates malapportionment. It disintegrates Jim Crow. It pulverizes de jure segregation, and it abolishes apartheid. Make no mistake about it. The second founding of this nation was largely ushered in by the ratification of the 14th Amendment, which states in part that no state, I repeat, no state, shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Those words were revolutionary then, and they are revolutionary right now. With the Equal Protection Clause, the black race, our race, was on like the dawn. You who once walked in darkness were now brought into the marvelous light.
Amen.
Grace sent disgrace into oblivion. Justice jostled injustice. And our social existence was upgraded, hear me somebody, from 3/5 of persons and property to full and equal citizenship. I'll wait till you're sure you want to applaud that. And if you know who you are, you will applaud that. Yeah. Watch this. Your blackest blackness is now on par with the white man's whitest whiteness. Can I say that one more time? Your blackest blackness is now on par with the white man's whitest whiteness. Your water is just as wet as his water. Your ice is just as cold as his ice. And your children are just as precious as his children. And not only that, but your vote is just as powerful as his vote. No more do we have to succumb to living lives that were tore up from the flow up. Turn it off. Or beat up from the feet up. Or pressed down from the chest to the ground. We are full citizens now. Empowered with a 15th Amendment that gives you the right to vote and to make your Black Lives Matter. You ought to make sure that your black votes count. I'll say that again. To make your Black Lives Matter. Excuse my expression, but you sure as hell better make your black votes count. Because right now, with the Reconstruction Stimulus Package, we have a unique opportunity and grave responsibility to fight for the next generation of safeguards that will ensure no American ever be denied the right to vote because of his or her race. I'm trying to tell y'all, this stimulus package is super powerful. And if the truth be told, is the glue that can keep us together building power. Yes. And when used correctly, can be hazardous to our enemies' lives. That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. In our efforts to remain compliant with national, we committed ourselves to coordinating our activities using the methodology of our association as set forth in Article 2, Section 2 of our bylaws. Direct action, litigation, legislation, and political action. And might I remind you that according to Article 2, Section 2D, with regard to political action, all units, I repeat, all units of the association are expected to increase registration and voting. All right. In other words, no branch has the luxury of absenting themselves from registering folk to vote. No branch whatsoever. We further comply with the game changes recognized by our national office, which I refer to as a 6-point justice vision that includes securing pro-labor, anti-poverty policies that ensure economic sustainability by fighting for employment, living wages, the alleviation of disparate unemployment, a green economy, labor and union rights, affordable housing, targeted empowerment zones, strong safety net services for the poor, fair policies for immigrants, infrastructure development, and fair tax reform. 2, educational equality by ensuring that every child receives a high-quality, well-funded, constitutional, diverse education, as well as access to community college and universities, and by securing equitable funding for minority colleges and universities. 3, health care for all, by ensuring access to the Affordable Care Act, Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, and by providing environmental protection. 4, fairness in the criminal justice system by addressing the continuing inequalities in the system for Black, brown, and poor white people. 5, protect and expand voting rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, immigrant rights, and the fundamental principle of equal protection under the law. And 6, expanding youth and young adult engagement. So, whether we are carrying out the mission in Craven or in Cleveland, in Watauga or in Wayne, or Polk or in Pender, in Burke or in Beaufort, in Jackson or in Johnston, in Surrey or in Sampson, in Henderson or in Hyde, in Guilford or in Greene, in Lincoln or in Lenore, in Randolph or in Robeson, or any of the other 80 counties, the similarities of our work will show forth because we are together building power. Together, 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 building power. Yeah, that 6-point justice vision crystallizes into a few advocacy priorities through which together we build our power.
All right.
Those are healthcare reform and criminal justice reform and immigration reform. And it is imperative that in this climate, we keep our eyes open, y'all, and stay woke regarding the attacks on the independent judicial system. For the balance of this report, I'm going to truncate some of this and go to some of those things that we've been able to accomplish. And we've been able to accomplish quite a bit. I have an extensive report in 14 pages, which I'm not going to share with you. But to share some of the victories with you that we have together achieved. We know that going back to October 2017, that the federal court appointed a special master in the racial gerrymander case as requested by we, the North Carolina NCNAACP. We also know that we led a North Carolina democracy group in filing a coalition letter with United States Congress in opposition to Thomas Farr. Y'all must not have heard. On November 27th, we released an open letter to the 3 branches of government and heard back from the executive branch and judicial branch, never heard back from the legislative branch. Let me say that one more time. We heard back from the executive branch. We heard back from the judicial branch, but we never heard back from the legislative branch. Bear that in mind. Our reaching out to the executive branch was partly responsible for our governor, the 75th governor in the life of the state of North Carolina, being present with us yesterday.
Hear, hear.
And we are on the upside of relations with the executive branch.
Right. Right.
You heard him yesterday say, and I took him to mean that we can be assured that a veto will be coming forward with regard to Senate Bill 824.
Amen.
We're also pleased with some of the action and litigation that's going on in our branches. Stokes County has gone to court over the coal ash issue in Dan River. We are so grateful that the Duplin County branch is holding up the banner of justice over there as it relates to all of the issues that are emanating from those hog farms. That they would not build in their communities. They wouldn't allow them in their communities, so they put them in ours to kill our people.
That's right.
And Duplin County is standing strong and saying, no, we won't allow this.
Right.
That's who we are. And that's what our stimulus package allows us the opportunity to do, to engage in these kinds of battles and warfare. On February 28th, we mobilized a bus to Washington, D.C. to oppose the nomination then of Thomas Farr to the Eastern District of North Carolina. It's federal court. And 9 months later, and I want y'all to hear me because this is what I shared with the folk that were on that bus 9 months later. I turned to him and I asked him, you know, what happens in 9 months, y'all? You give birth. And I told him that we're here in Washington, D.C. to give birth to something, to create something that has not been before, something that they think is an impossible feat. But it's been charged to us to come here and do something to move a mountain, Brother Courtney, out of the way.
All right. All right.
And before that day was over, when we stepped into the last office that we stepped into, which was Senator Tim Scott's office,
Amen.
we stepped into that office and we went to work on Tim Scott's staff. And I'm here to tell you that those maybe 50 or so, what I'm calling North Carolina midwives, went to work on that office, and it resulted in Tim Scott opposing the confirmation of Thomas Farr to the Eastern District. And that nomination and confirmation have been withdrawn. And it's because of astute warriors like you, the North Carolina NCAACP, who are still doing the work that was begun 109 years ago. And there ain't no stopping us now. We've got to work harder now than we've ever worked before. And I know that together we can build the kind of power we need to build for such a time as this. To turn North Carolina back into a state that is progressively minded, and to get those folk over there on Jones Street out of our house. That's our house.
Who's home? Who's home? Who's home?
It's our house. Our house. It's our house. And we have to, North Carolina NAACP, it's incumbent upon us to raise up an army, a valiant army, that is going to turn this state around.
All right.
And when we come together,
Yes.
we can certainly
Definitely.
build the kind of power that we need. Just want to close in this wise with a story that I once heard that has become a very important story for me. Once upon a time, there were some rabbits. There were some black rabbits, some white rabbits, some Baptist rabbits, some Islamic rabbits, some Methodist rabbits, some Jewish rabbits, some female rabbits, some gay rabbits, some straight rabbits, some old, some young, some rich, some poor rabbits. Apparently it had been a hard year on the rabbits. So they got together to decide what to do, because too many of them were being slaughtered and they were decreasing in number. So they began questioning their own survival. One of the wise old rabbits, I don't know, could have been Carolyn Coleman, stood up and said, "Let's all tie our tails together and march down to the river and throw ourselves in. At least then we'll all be together." So they all agreed to tie their tails together, march down to the river. But as they started moving toward the river, they met the hunter. The hunter had never seen so many rabbits together at one time. So he stood his gun up in the sand, keeled over, and there he died.
Right.
Oh, but the rabbits kept making their way down to the river. Then the rabbits met up with a pack of hunting dogs. But those hunting dogs had never seen so many rabbits together at one time. So shocked at the sight of seeing so many rabbits together at one time, the dogs turned and yip, 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 ran off in the other direction. Oh, but the rabbits kept making their way down to the river. When the rabbits got down to the river, they realized that the weather had been so severe that it had dried up the river. So they couldn't jump in and drown themselves. So everybody looked to Carolyn Coleman, that wise old rabbit, to tell them what their next steps should look like. And that wise old rabbit said, "My fellow rabbits, I was wrong. I made a few mistakes. Apparently, there's something going on in our favor that I never even thought of, that now leads me to believe that we can survive and we will survive. But we've got to keep our tails tied together." All of our branches need to tie our tails together, and together build the power that we need to move the mountains that are in our way. Thank you, North Carolina.